Hey everyone, Christopher Beast here. In today's video, I'm going to be giving my review on what I think about Dying Light 2. I played around 16 hours of the game, and here's what I thought about it. Dying Light 2 is a zombie survival game with heavy elements of parkour and stealth tied in to make it more gritty and difficult than the standard zombie shooter game. The original Dying Light is a classic, and in my eyes, one of the best zombie games to ever come out. But how does this new game stack up? Well, let's get right into this. Before I go any deeper, I should probably answer this question that I'm sure you all have. Is it worth it to buy? And my answer is no. Unless you have 1 to 2 friends who already own it and are willing to spend multiple hours playing it with you, it is simply not worth the $60 price tag. But if you're more curious about why I have this opinion, well, let's get into the specifics. And starting the game, we have the tutorial. It is here in the tutorial that I have my first major issue. The tutorial is way too long and way too boring. For me and my duo, it took almost an hour to nearly 2 hours to clear the entire tutorial and unlock free roam and the co-op online mode, which are some of the better parts of the game. This tutorial is way too hand-holding and tries to walk you patiently through every single mechanic in the game, when really only a brief explanation and throwing us into the fryer could have worked just fine. This tutorial is just too linear and just not enjoyable, and having your first 2 hours of gameplay be completely unenjoyable is not a good start. But upon finishing the tutorial, you unlock co-op mode, which is one of the huge positives of this game that I want to get back to later. But it's quite enjoyable. We're going to save it at that for now. But what exactly is there to do with these friends now that you can play with them? Well, you could go fight some things, but if you do fight some things, you'll quickly notice that the combat system honestly leaves a lot to be desired. I'm going to attempt to summarize the combat system very quickly. So basically how it works is there are enemies who will try to attack you. You can dodge their attacks by dodging or blocking. If you get a perfect block, you get to do some combos. But generally speaking, the majority of combat is going to be you blocking an enemy's attack, which will probably stagger them. Then you strike at them while they're staggered, or you sprint around and strike at them from behind while they're not blocking. Simply, a lot of combat is using your high mobility that exists in this game to get opportunity strikes when you can, and then dodging the rest of the enemy's return attacks, or blocking the return attacks. It is very simple and rudimentary, and a lot of it is just striking, waiting for enemy to strike, and then striking again, and then repeating that cycle until the enemy is dead. This can have varying levels of difficulty, but the difficulty doesn't exactly come from cleverly planned out AI tactics or any of that, but more so because some enemies, when they hit you, will two-tap you and leave you dead almost instantly, and other enemies, when you hit them, will reveal they have thick blubber and will require an additional 30 to 40 hits. This type of difficulty also lends to a big problem of the combat. The combat generally feels like you're fighting the same enemy over and over and over again, with really no major variations, besides some of them use only ranged, and some of them are really quick and jump around. So you basically have 3 enemy types: guy that uses melee, guy that uses ranged, or guy that is extremely quick. And that can make combat feel very boring very quickly, and that is at least my experience, and then I just didn't find combat enjoyable anymore, because it just kind of felt like once you learned the algorithm, you could play it completely, and there was very little that could be done to stop you besides sticking an enemy on you or sticking 90 enemies on you with giant HP bars. But moving on from there, I do want to mention one last thing about the AI of the enemy. The AI of the enemy doesn't seem very intelligent, and it doesn't seem very good at fighting you, which I might be a little too harsh on the game here, but I think the AI has to be pretty good in order to fight in a parkour, very heavy parkour game. If you have high mobility as a player and the enemy can't outsmart you and get ahead of you, you can just keep sprinting endlessly, and there's not much they can do if they just simply track you. But that is my opinion on the combat. So with my opinion that the combat is so bad, what about the parkour? The parkour is certainly one of the beautiful aspects of the game that is simply amazing. Being able to sprint around rooftops and navigate the city in this way is quite fun and enjoyable. However, this beautiful aspect of the game that is definitely one of its key aspects, does have a slight negative to it, in that it does take a while to grind up to get the parkour abilities that actually make it fun, as early game parkour is simply dreadful and is going to be filled with you dying because your parkour abilities aren't up to par to do what you want to do as someone that is jumping around the rooftops. On the notion of the parkour just not exactly being very nice for new players, a lot of bugs exist in the early game, and really in the game in general, regarding parkour, which is not a problem when you get to endgame, because when you get to endgame, you have tons of perks that basically cover all of these problems, making it not really a relevant issue. But early game, these bugs will kill you a lot. You will try to jump and grab something, and it will glitch, you will jump through, and then you die. You will be sprinting, and then you kind of have a weird collision and fall through something, you die. And that is really frustrating when the tutorial is already as long as it is, and then you're dying at random points in the tutorial for literally no reason. It can get very frustrating very quickly, but I do gotta give the props where it is due. The parkour in the middle and the end of the game is fucking phenomenal, and one of the best parkour I've seen in any game, period. But if you're doing all this parkour, why are you doing the parkour? What is there to do? Well, there's the main story, which I'm going to be getting back to later for key reasons, but there is quite a bit of side quests and locations to clear out, which are all boring and quite pointless. The side quests sometimes offer interesting insight into the lore, but the writing of everything in this game is streamlined and cliche, just to the point that it's not enjoyable. The characters that are introduced in anything are dry as toast, and they're hard to really see any complexity in. They're just boring. The rewards for these side quests are frankly never worth it, since the items you get from the main story are usually enough to keep the hordes away, and if they're not, you got your parkour abilities. And since the rewards and the writing and the gameplay of these side quests are so boring, there's sadly no reason to do any of them. So you're not doing these side quests. Maybe the random events on the street are cool to do as you're parkouring over them. Well, also no, these events are also quite boring. They also get quite repetitive very quickly, and the rewards aren't even worth the weapon duration that really takes to clear them. There is a silver lining though, in that the endgame missions called the GRE event exist. These things are awesome, and I really wish there was more quests like them just in the standard storyline and side quests. They're really hard, they're really good rewards, and they're actually just fun things to do when you have a full squad. Your squad won't easily clear it. I would suggest doing these when you're under-leveled, as doing them at the same level makes them laughably easy, and they're really not even worth bringing in a squad. If you're doing it under-leveled, though, they can be very, very fun. Now onto what makes those easy missions just so easy, and that's the gear. The gear in this game always feels too strong for what you're currently fighting, or too weak. It never feels to be at the perfect spot. It always feels one or the other. Whether you're in hard mode or easy mode, it always feels this way. You're either broken or you're untouchable, and it is quite stupid, I would say. The issue is also really compounded by the lack of diversity between all these weapons. All melee weapons in this game kind of blend together, as the one-handed weapons are either quick and slashing to deal with enemies, or quick and brunt to hit one enemy many times for a stun. The two-handed enemy weapons are quite similar, heavy and slashing to quell a horde, or heavy single damage to take out a boss. This means once you've played the game for around 3 hours, you've basically felt every available weapon out there. And from there on is about choosing the one with the highest damage stat, because one-handed axe and another one-handed axe are going to play identical, and whatever one has the higher damage stat is the one you should be choosing. And while yes, there are bows, crossbow, and a single-use shotgun out there, they aren't really viable in most situations because they're either too expensive or don't do enough damage, and they're also hard to get because they're not available for most of the playthrough. On the topic of gear, there's also armor. Armor gives cool little stat buffs and kind of works how I'd expect it to work in a survival game, but it's nothing really to look at too much. I mean, it's not something to shit on because I think it works perfectly for the game it's in, and I have no real qualms with it, but it's nothing really to go, oh look, the armor system, it's there. I enjoy it. Moving on. The general nature of the survival game since, its armor at least works like that. The general nature of the game does not work like a survival game. The durability system, while a characteristic of the survival genre, in this game is barely a limiting factor and simply an inconvenience that can either be completely ignored by the fast rate at which you get better gear or by the amount of repair that upgrading these weapons gives you. The sheer amount of safe houses and UV lamps scattered almost everywhere you look will make the nighttime transformation timer barely even an issue, and at most a minor problem that will force you to disengage an enemy for at most a few minutes to go resupply, and it's simply something that you shouldn't be worrying about. Consumables drop from tons of enemies and are easy to loot, and even if you don't have such good luck, vendors can sell it to you for pretty cheap using the money you get from dumping your piles of trash you get from these enemies onto the vendors. The nighttime chases are probably the closest this game gets to being an actual survival title, but the chases can be pretty intense if you aren't really aware of what you're doing. Because if you play decently careful and you know what you're doing, you can easily avoid even starting them, and if you accidentally start one, you can prevent them from escalating in difficulty also quite easily. But if you fail to do that, it actually does give a pretty cool survival experience. So I do got to give props where that is due. Now into the saddest part of this video, the storyline of the game. With so little going on in terms of side quest, one would pray that the main story is either fun or its writing is at the very least a tiny bit engaging. And sadly, one would find neither of that. With boring cliche writing that introduces characters we barely care about who belong to factions that are so horrible and about as deep as a kiddie pool, it's horrible. And the writing is lackluster. In my original script, I had a nice 300-word rant about how horrible the story was, with me taking apart every single aspect of it. And upon reading that story, I realized it would be wasting your time as well as my own, because I can basically summarize everything that was going to be said in it like this. The story is horrible, the characters are horrible and boring, the real lack of meaning behind your choices is stupid and meaningless. It makes you feel like you're wasting time, it makes everything feel like a waste of time, and I just didn't feel like I needed a 300-word rant to say those couple of words. The main story is barely even a story at all, and the writing can barely be called writing. And that would summarize my thoughts on the game's story in general. One last thing before I close out this video, I should mention this game's big old silver lining. I mentioned it earlier, but I really want to double down on it. The co-op experience. Playing with your duo of friends in this game is very, very fun. Being able to just bounce around the city skylines and parkour and mess around, kill random zombies, do random events is fun. It's quite enjoyable. And it was the one thing I found while playing the game that made me feel like my $60 investment was actually worth the money. So that's my thoughts on this game, on Dying Light 2. If you decide to buy it, that's on you, but hopefully this video either echoes your frustrations you had after buying it, or can help clarify if the investment is worth it for you. If you have friends who have it, I would say it is. But until next time, this has been Christopher Beast, and I hope to see you all next time.